And you're ready.
So hello to everyone who is here, and thank you for joining us. This is obviously our third annual Mental Health Awareness Week. I'm Shelly Monaco, I'm the school psychologist here, and I would say as a school psychologist, this is near and dear to my heart, mental health. There are many people that make this happen. For me in particular, Allison Palladino is a huge supporter of making sure that we can have this week for students, as well as many other people around the building. Marissa Polana, who's a social worker here, both guidance counselors, Kelsey Dugan, Lori, as well as Joanne Feaster. So just so many people. And then on top of that, we have always reach out to community to see if we can get some support in the community as well and get our message out there. And this year, Stop and Shop was a big help for us, and has given us some donations that will wrap up our week for the end of the week. So it's great. Talking about mental health is so important, and really for many reasons. It does improve our community by making it more acceptable, especially for those who are struggling or suffering with any mental illness, so that they can seek help, that they learn how to cope, and then they are sort of moving towards recovery. And one of the things that we have done each and every year is sort of look at getting a speaker to come in. We always start the week with kind of a warm-up assembly where we're talking to the students, but then we follow that with someone coming in to kind of talk to our students about their own journey. And so Minding Your Mind is a great agency. We love partnering with them, and they really focus on prevention through education. And so Morgan joined us today and spoke to all the students in a virtual format, which is wonderful. Years ago, we did it in person. So it's nice to even have the option to do it virtually. And, I think the message that the students heard today is not only, that it's so important to be focused on your mental health, but also sort of the road to recovery when you're struggling. And honestly, too, our focus this year has been on not just about mental illness, but also a mental healthy state. And so we've been doing a lot of activities this week, and we'll continue to do on improving your mental health overall and kind of maintaining that, recognizing there are ups and downs for everybody. So I think after hearing Morgan's story today, students were so impressed by not only her bravery. I was just saying before everyone got on that, one of the students we had sent an email out to them afterwards asking for some feedback. And one of the students just responded with a personal message to Morgan saying, "You are dealing with this like a boss," which really just highlights how impressed they all were too with not only where she was and where she is now, but also on how she delivers her message. So things like saying how courageous and inspiring you were with your message. They learned a lot about mental health listening to you talk about your personal experience. Some students even recognizing their own personal connection to your experience to some degree, and really highlighting how they can see and how they've learned something about helping others. So I thank you because it was fantastic today. But we did have students who had questions, and we didn't give them a chance to ask those questions today because there was no kind of way to do that with some students virtual, others in pods and everything. So we're going to kind of just ask you some of those today while you're here, since we're not going to do a full presentation without a larger group. But I think that's even a more personal note. So thank you.
Awesome.
With us.
So the students today, yeah, they really enjoyed the presentation today, and we'll push that out. We'll push that recording out later so that people can view that again. But we'll just go over some real quick. They filled out a Google form, 2 questions on there. One was what questions do they have from the presentation today, and any comments they want to make. And so yes, the very first comment was, "You're dealing with mental illness like a boss." So that was really cute. That student also had a question saying, why were people so awful to you? And I don't know if that's a question you can answer, but.
Yeah, I would say that when I look back at that time and like those people that didn't necessarily treat me right, I don't think they were aware. And if they were aware, I don't think that they also had the adequate support that they needed, because it seems like when I'm looking back at it from like this outside perspective, I see those people that were in my life that weren't necessarily treating me right. I think that in ways they probably weren't being treated right either. And I don't think that they had the adequate skills and tools to be able to treat others right. And from my perspective, I think that they could have utilized some of the things I utilize in regards to just like therapy and treatment and all of that. I think that that's something that would have been really helpful for them too. So looking back on it now, I mean, in the moment, I was angry about it and I was sad about it and all these other emotions. But looking at it now, I do feel a degree of empathy and think that those people had their own things too. And maybe it was a form of projecting onto me or whatever it was. But I think that they were all dealing with their own things too and didn't know how to handle it.
Thank you. There's a question here that a student asked, and there were a lot of questions kind of similar to this one. Students wanted to know, like, where did you build the confidence to go ahead and reach out to an adult, whether it was your, you had mentioned like finally telling your parents how you were feeling. And the students are asking really like, where did you find that sort of inner strength or that confidence?
Yeah. So when I gave my speech, I talked about in the midst of thinking about all the things I was missing out on, like the small things, like the family birthday parties or my friends asking me to go out. I couldn't do those things. And in the midst of those, I talked about how I realized I wasn't actually living my life. I was just surviving and going through the motions. And I wouldn't even call it a breakdown. In a way, I would call it a breakthrough because I took like 5 seconds of I'm going to tell someone. And in that 5 seconds, I talk about how I told my parents, and immediately right after, I wanted to take it back because a huge part of me wanted to stay sick and a very small part of me wanted to get better. And that was a part of me that spoke out and said something. And I think that after I did that, I did want to take it back right away. And I think that the more I started to talk about it, the more that part of me wanted to get better. And the more that part of me that wanted to stay sick started to shrink. So I think it starts with having like a small amount of courage and just acting on it in that moment and just taking that leap. Because realistically, for the most part, I didn't have the courage to say anything. But in those 5 seconds, I did. So I jumped on it. And as I grew in my recovery, I started to have more of those moments of courage, and they started that tolerance. Like I said, that part of me that wanted to get better, that was so small, started to get bigger. And then the big part of me that wanted to stay sick started to get smaller. So it was a very slow process. And I hope that visual isn't confusing as I do that. I just talk with my hands and like to use visuals. But yeah, so I would say just acting on those really small moments in any way that you can.
Okay. So some of the other students you had talked about some of the self-harm that sort of led to sort of reaching out. And, a lot of students were wondering like kind of what goes through your mind, like what brought you to that point and, kind of what was it that you were thinking of in those first moments?
Of the act of self-harm or in the moment of?
Both. I think they're asking kind of in both lights.
I think that in the moments of actually acting on the self-harm, that was a combination of hearing about it and seeing it in the media, but not enough education on the fact that it wasn't going to be a sustainable coping skill. I think that in my head, I had the idea that I knew that from bits and pieces that I took away from the media and kids in my school and stuff like that, I learned that, oh, I hear this works, or I hear this is a way to release feelings. So I used it, but I wasn't getting enough education on this is a negative coping skill, and this isn't a way to just to sustain being able to cope with negative emotions. And during that time, I genuinely thought that it was going to help me feel better. And like I mentioned in my talk, it short term did, but long term, it was just not something that was sustainable. It wasn't something that was good for me. And it wasn't something that was actually going to resolve those feelings inside of me that were hurting and needed a space to be able to talk about them and work through them. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. And I think the follow-up to that was one of the very next questions where the student asked kind of how did you come to an end on that? Like, how did you finally stop actions of self-harm? What brought you to the final stopping point?
I think I had a conversation with a trusted friend actually that told me one day when I was having urges that if you do this again, you're just going to put yourself back in the cycle and back in the loop. And I think for some reason, my friend telling me that combined with a lot of other factors like learning positive coping skills such as art or having my create tattoo and all the things that creating means to me, the combination of those two were really helpful. And whenever I had the urge, I remembered kind of zooming out to that bigger picture of that recovery and how the bigger picture, if I were to act on that, it would put me back in that cycle and take me steps back. And I thought about that long-term goal of wanting to move forward and wanting to get better and wanting to use those skills that I knew were available, like the positive coping mechanisms I mentioned, and looking down at my wrist and seeing create and remembering what to do. So I think that thought in the back of my head, like, this is just going to put me back in that cycle, really helped me pull strength and willpower to use my positive coping skills.
And I think that's a great message. I talked to a few students after today. One of the students that I spoke to really tagged into that piece that you presented there on your word, create, and what that meant for you as far as creating opportunities for you to participate in things that were helpful, like exercising and those different things that you listed. And in my conversation with this student, they brought up this idea that they wanted their own word. You know, they wanted to come up with their own word that meant something, you know, valuable to them. And, you know, in the midst of me just sitting there after finishing today and having this conversation, the student is throwing all these ideas out there of what the word would be for them. And in that process of thinking about that, they're exploring what their positive qualities are. And I thought that was just so unique to watch, but I don't think that was a practice that that student would have ever done had you not kind of presented them with that idea today and really talked about that idea. So thank you for that, because it was beautiful to watch it. I almost wish I could have like had you here to watch what they went through.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, but it really sent a really clear message to this in particular student, and so just so thankful.
And that brings the next question, where they were asking, you had talked about being creative, but they wanted to know what other kinds of hobbies do you have that help to kind of keep your mind going in that positive direction. They're interested in knowing what your other hobbies are.
That's a really good one. I think that especially with the eating disorder and self-harm and pretty much any kind of negative coping skill, for me, I felt so out of control in my life that those felt like the things that could bring me in control. And I think that now that I'm in this space and I'm telling this story, I clearly found other ways to be able to control my life. And I think that includes, you know, those hobbies that I found, and those things like such as the things that I named, like painting and hiking and this and that. Those were some things, yes, but I found other ways to control my life too. So for example, I used to live in Massachusetts, and then I decided that I wasn't happy where I was and I wanted to move. So I moved, and I was in a space in my life to do that. And I know it's not the same circumstance when you're still in grade school, but I want to say that taking the opportunities and realizing that I had control of my life gave me the outlet to find those other things that I like to do. So for example, writing is one of them, where I really love to write. That's something that when I'm having negative thoughts, they don't have to live inside of me anymore. I can put them on paper. So that's a huge one. I'm trying to think of some other ones I didn't name. I have a cat, and that cat gives me unconditional love every single day. That cat needs me in his life, and I need him in my life. So that's another example.
Thank you. I think students ask good questions. Oh, sorry, Sherry.
I was going to say, I think, sorry to interrupt, but I was going to ask, and I think this kind of goes along with that, is that a lot of the students wanted to know sort of how, you know, in connection with friends, family, teachers, the people in their lives that surround them, which is really important because that's what we're talking about this week, is connectedness. How long do you think it took for those people around you to kind of realize that something was not okay, or that you needed some help, and what did they do?
Like the adults or my friends in my life?
We got questions asking, in particular, how long did it really take for your friends to realize that you needed help? And then the same thing with teachers. I think I mentioned to you earlier, like, did teachers realize it? And then even parents, I think somebody had made a response to when you were talking about your dad's face that day.
Yeah.
They really connected to that. And so, like, if you can talk a little bit about that, I think that was really moving for them.
Yeah, I think that it honestly took a while, and that's not necessarily on them, because like I mentioned in one of my slides, the slide with the split down my face of the smiling and then the frowning face, I was very, very good at hiding it. It wasn't, at that time in my life, it wasn't even an option to talk about it. There were a lot of signs that something was wrong. Like, for example, just because of the eating disorder I had gone through, and just a side note, you can have an eating disorder at any weight, but me in particular, I was very, very underweight. So that was very apparent. And I knew that a lot of kids in my school were talking about it. And I heard a lot about it after I came back from treatment, where a lot of kids noticed that I was very underweight and something was wrong, but I don't think any of them knew what they could do at the time. And same with my friends. A lot of them didn't say anything until I had came back and said that they noticed these things and they didn't know what to do. And same with teachers, where I literally had a teacher when I came back that said, "It's good to see you smiling again." So that says to me that a lot of people knew, but they didn't necessarily know what to do about it. So I guess my one piece of thing I did want to say to that that's a mantra that we talk about a lot with Minding Your Mind is, if you see a friend that you think might be struggling, it never hurts to say anything or reach out. And if you're afraid that they're going to be mad at you, it's better to lose a friendship than a friend.
That's great advice. And we had some conversations like that during our kickoff yesterday, talking about what can you do when you see someone else struggling, and what would that look like. So that's really great. One girl, she's very sweet, and she did write, "Does life really get better for you?" So
Yeah,
I think, yeah, that's good for her to hear.
110%.
And she loved your stories. She said you were so informative. Someone asks about sleep, and does not getting enough sleep really interfere with your mental health, and can it be something that actually helps, if you are struggling?
Yes, 110%. I look at that almost like like, for example, there's a psychology term, the hierarchy of needs. So I look at that as like the bottom, like that basic. Yes, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So like the bottom, that's like one of the basics. So it's hard to be able to build on top of that with like your coping skills and your friends and your support system if you don't have that basis of just taking care of those basic things like sleep and water and adequate food and being able to move your body. So I would consider that like at the bottom of, and it definitely shows up in a lot of ways when you're not getting enough sleep.
One of the students asked, when you were talking in your story about sort of your lowest point, what gave you the motivation to continue getting up and getting out of bed every morning?
I would say that really small part of me I mentioned that wanted to get better. I think what gave me motivation was trying to zoom myself out and look at that bigger picture. Because every day when it was hard to get out of bed, I was in, as I described it, like that tunnel vision of darkness, where it was almost like I was going down a highway and there were all these different exits I could take, but for some reason I couldn't see the exits. And every once in a while, when I didn't have that motivation, I would try really hard to almost zoom out and kind of picture all those different exits and think about different ways that my life could change or things could change. So I would think about that. And I would also think about, opposed to what I didn't have, what I did have. Like, even though I was in this mental negative spiral and I couldn't really see the things that I did have at that time, I knew that I had a family there that they didn't necessarily know how to help me sometimes, but they did care and they did love me and they did want me to get better. And yeah, I had those teachers that didn't say anything, or those classmates that didn't say anything, but they did notice and they did care and they wanted to help. They just didn't know how. So just knowing that my life gave meaning and that I added value to other lives in those ways too was helpful.
Thank you. A lot of kids want to know, kind of, do you ever just fully recover, or is it something that you learn to manage and cope through? There's a lot of questions that kind of have that same theme running in them.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. I would say, because mental health is something that you need to keep up with, I would consider myself, yes, in this full recovery phase, but that doesn't mean that I stop doing all the things that I need to do to be able to keep up with my mental health. It's like if I had broken a leg really bad and I recovered from it, maybe I can't lean on that leg the same way all the time, or maybe I need to be a little more cautious on that leg sometimes. I would consider that similar with mental health, where I still need to keep up with I still go to therapy to this day. I'm on medication to this day. Like, there are a lot of things that I use all those coping skills to this day. There are a lot of things that I need to do to keep up with it. So I would consider it more as this lifelong maintenance. And because, life isn't going to stop throwing challenges at you. You're just going to learn how to handle them differently and endure them differently and kind of open up that window of tolerance you have for those challenges.
And I do think we're talking to them about that too. You know, like I said, when we started, you know, our focus is on mental health, not just about illness, but like on healthy choices and healthy connections and, you know, doing the work to care for your mental health, just like you do with your physical health. And so I think that's really a message that is getting across to them too, that it does take work. Like you do have to work on your mental health, just like you would, you know, if you wanted to run a marathon, have to work on, you know, preparing for that. You know, we are in the life of marathon. And so different things are going to happen, and having good, solid sort of self-care routines and habits, as well as coping strategies for when those things do happen. Those are both really, really important. So it's good.
So most of our questions, I think, kind of ran the themes we've already asked. There's one final that I think all the students would like to hear is if they recognize that someone is struggling around them, what advice do you have for them in what they could do or what they should do?
If they recognize that someone is struggling, I would definitely go to I made 3 points at the end of my presentation. So I'll say them again really quick. So one of them is it's never too late or too early to get help. Everyone is equally as worthy of help, and always have that trusted adult. So I would say the advice there is if you see something, go to that trusted adult. And, you know, like I said, I would rather lose a friendship than a friend. I think that's important to loop around with this too. That trusted adult can help find that resources and help be able to help that kid. Because even if that person you think is struggling, maybe even if there is that fear of misinterpreting it, it never hurts to be able to reach out and just have that support there readily available, because that support is just like going to the doctors every year too. It's like the same thing, just being able to check up on things, keep things in maintenance. So I don't think that ever hurts. So I would definitely recommend talking to that trusted adult.
Thank you. So the last thing I'll share, and then I'll let Sherry kind of run from here. But so the 2 questions on the survey were what questions you have and then what comments you have. And I just want to say again, with some parents that have joined us, the students were they were really impressed. They were inspired. They were comforted. And there were quite a few students who left comments for us that said, you know, it was great to hear her story because I myself have been anxious, or I have felt depression, or you know, I have friends who are suffering. One student walked up to me, and I shared this with you earlier, but share with parents on the line, you know, walked up to me at the end of the day and said, I asked, you know, how was the presentation? Did you enjoy it? The student said, I absolutely did. And I'm so glad that our school recognized that we students needed this. And that to me was huge, because we do recognize that there is that need in the midst of a global pandemic. We know that we get information all the time that students are being diagnosed with anxiety. Everybody has anxiety right now. This is a very anxious time to be alive. But our kids today, I think, truly felt inspired. I think a lot of them expressed empathy and understanding, and the well wishes that they're sending you are really impressive. So I just want to say from Wickford, thank you so much for today. I think it really made a huge difference for our students.
And thank you for everyone and your feedback and your comments and listening. I really, really appreciate it. I'm glad I could talk today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan.
Sherry, do you want to just kind of wrap up with maybe some final thoughts?
Absolutely.
Or resources?
And we can take any questions if there are questions from anyone that's here. Following this, you know, we are going to continue our Mental Health Awareness Week, obviously, and we have lots of positive activities planned for the students for this week, like I mentioned before. And, you know, we also, by doing this, kind of are allowing the students to see myself, Ms. Polana, all the adults in the building as people to go to connect, and these are the supports that are available to you. So, you know, sometimes I'll have students just come up to me and say, you know, math is really bumming me out, and, you know, talk to me about this. And I will sit for 10 minutes and talk to a student about math. And it doesn't even mean that I need to know exactly what they're doing in math, but I think students using the support staff that are in the building to kind of deal with those day-to-day things is so important, and we're always available for that. And so I think it's wonderful. In addition to this, you as parents, we did put together some materials You're going to kind of get one sheet that has a lot of information on it. One of the things that I really stress and I try to do when I'm working with students here, and I encourage adults to too, is like sort of model really good self-care. And I think the students pick up on it. They understand that. So I'll be like, you know what, it's a stressful day. Let's make a glitter jar. I'll call out Miss Palladino and I'll say, come upstairs and make a glitter jar with me. And we're sort of modeling for students that taking the time, taking a deep breath, like giving a moment, all of those really good self-care and coping strategies that we want to have them do. And so as parents, you're going to get home this one sheet and it has some information on there, just because as a parent myself of 3 children, I know like day in and day out that it is easy to forget about our own selves and to focus so much on what they need and what they're requiring of us on a day-to-day basis. So you're going to get some information there just about things that you can do and model that help your students as well. Information for helping your students, your children work on some of the things, the struggles that they may have. I have 2 practicum students this year from Rhode Island College that are in the school psychology program, and they've put together a really cute slideshow for you on, student struggles at this age and younger. And so you'll get a copy of that as well as kind of contact numbers for different places around the state that provide different opportunities. Some of them provide, things like this that you can jump on and listen to and get feedback. Some are sort of, short little courses that you can take as a parent. And I still go on them sometimes and take them too. And so there are many opportunities out there now that we're living in this virtual place a lot more that you can certainly access. And so I've put some information about those on there as well. And so, yeah, I'm so happy that we have the opportunity to do this. Again, thank you so much for letting us work with your students on this big piece that really is going to go a long way to making sure that no matter what obstacle comes their way, that they are kind of prepared to work through that or get the help that they need in order to work through that. So thank you. And if you have any questions for any of us, we can certainly answer those. But then Ms. Palladino will kind of be pushing out that information. If you have virtual students, I want you to know that we had a virtual kickoff just for them as well yesterday. Then we put together a virtual packet for students because we're doing brain breaks and all sorts of fun things during the week where the students are in the building. So we want to include the virtual students in that as well. So there's packets available for them here that you can pick up. And then the end of the week activity too will be opportunities for you to pick up kind of our closing activity as well. So if you do have a virtual student, they were on with us today and they, had their own assembly from yesterday's kickoff too. So any questions from anybody who has joined us? All right, well, if you do have a question post today's meeting, whether it's for me, for Ms. Palladino, or even that we can forward on to Morgan, certainly you can email myself or Ms. Palladino and we can, attempt to answer that as well, but definitely keep a lookout for the materials. And once again, Morgan, thank you so much. It has been really a pleasure to have you join us at Wickford for this, and you're wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Morgan. Thanks. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.